Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Fatal Error podcast. Today's guest is Bridget Harris, founder and CEO of YouCanBookMe. And I'm very glad that she accepted my invitation because aside from a view from Bridget, from the point of view of running a software company, a successful and bootstrapped software company, I might add, she also has she brings a different perspective to the whole topic because in a previous incarnation of her career, she was extremely active in politics, having been one of the senior advisors to then Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, Nick Clegg. So Bridget brings a sort of an insider's view of how the political mechanism works, at least in the UK, and why things like creating the right policies to deal with problems like climate change tend to be harder than we might guess from the outside, which is of course not to say that the inaction is something we should be okay with, but it's nonetheless a very unique perspective from the range of people that I've spoken to. So, as always, I'll see you at the end of the episode for some concluding notes from myself. And now, Bridget Harris. The topic of the conversation is climate change and environmental issues and so on, but it's not based on the expectation isn't that you have an expert opinion around this, and neither do I, right? It's more around it's something that concerns me. I've learned a little bit about it, and one of the concerns I have is that as a software tech person, right, somebody who's been in this industry for a while, probably like yourself, I don't see this conversation happening very much. So I just figured, let's see whether people want to talk about it, and it looks like some people do. So that's basically it. The way I've been going through these is very conversational, but I do have a few talking points which I'll kind of seed the conversation. And a good place to start is usually just you telling me what you're up to, what your background is, what your company does, and so on. And just that's usually easy for the other person to talk about. So maybe we can start there. Can you tell me a little bit about your company and your background, the sort of short version, as though this was a regular SaaS podcast interview?
Well, funnily enough, actually, for the first time, this topic of the podcast is relevant. That what I did before I started to run YouCanBookMe, because previous to running YouCanBookMe, I was in politics. I worked in politics, and my interest in politics was about political and constitutional change, essentially how systems are set up. So I worked for the Lib Dems in the UK, primarily because they believe in proportional representation. And there is a sort of a parity there between votes cast and, the outcome of the people that have been elected. And then hopefully, as a result, you get some form of shared decision making. And there's lots of theory around that, that shared decision making is better. You basically make better decisions as a result. So for a very long time, I worked in really, at the high end of politics. I was a special advisor for the Deputy Prime Minister for a time.
Okay.
I worked in Parliament. I was an advisor to multiple ministers, and I worked in local government, advised council leaders, and I did all sorts of things. And it's not exactly that I became disillusioned, but I think that when you talk about any question around sort of what can a group of people do to change something, particularly if you add a value to that, you say this is a normative thing we should be doing. We should be doing this. This is going to have a good outcome. Yeah. This is the right thing to do. So you attach a kind of a normative value to the action. what the rule of politics will tell you is that there is, if you're trying to put something into the system, by definition, you're going to be taking something else out. And you're going to have two groups of people, one group of people that are protecting the thing that you're having to take out, and a group of people that are trying to argue for the thing that you're putting in. So put it in more simple language, politics is transactional, it's give and take.
So
And
it's a good example, something like higher taxes. Some people want higher taxes because they'll be able to invest in the NHS with the extra revenue, and some people don't want more money out of their pockets.
Well, I mean, that's an example of a literal transaction, that you are literally taking, money from somebody. And there is other, really complex but fairly well accepted arguments around universal taxation. Essentially, a public good is created through everybody paying in. So in a way, nobody has a choice about paying in. What I'm talking about is more of the what in some ways sociologists would call wicked issues, which are where there is no obvious and accepted answer and solution. So essentially, taxation is basically accepted as public policy. What you spend that money on is a slightly different thing. But you are right in a sense that we have all agreed to put money into a system that we are accepting is going to be paid, is going to be used for the collective good. How we choose to spend that money on the collective good then becomes the relevant question. And some people want you to spend it on something over here, and somebody will want to spend something over there. And so therefore there's an opportunity cost on everything that you do. And the problem that I found when I worked in politics is these decisions about the good things and the bad things that we end up doing, it becomes so disaggregated that at the top level, at the politicians' level, when they're making, decisions that affect everybody, their decisions become highly compromised by, if you like, the meta-narrative. So they're no longer interested in the individual experience of somebody on the street in Birmingham. Instead, they're thinking about the bigger picture, and they think so strategically that they kind of lose. They lose a real connection to people's lives. And
which is something politicians get accused of a lot, right? Not being sort of in touch with the man or woman in the street. Kind of that's right?
Yeah, and there's a counter argument to that. And the counter argument, if politicians were always just doing what the mob, if you like, wanted, if every time an individual person came up to them and shouted the loudest, and they only did what was immediately in front of them, then they would lose touch with that argument about redistribution of taxation, to say, even if I'm a rich person and I pay tax and I don't get the immediate benefit of paying for a public health program, actually broadly the public health program will benefit everybody in the country that I live in, and I end up living in a country with a higher standard of living and a higher welfare and health of the nation, and I do benefit, but it's less of immediate and obvious benefit to me. So a good example of that is in Britain, around 9% of the population will pay for their children to go into private school education. They'll pay for their schooling. But that doesn't exempt them from some of their taxation being paid into the public school system, into the state school system. They still have to pay for state school. So in the kind of broader picture, when I was working in politics, I ended up feeling that my own personal and particular contribution and what impact I could make to make the world a better place, for the sake of sort of summing it up, is to the investment that me and Keith made into YouCanBookMe and into our startup has a very simple proposition, which is that we build software for people to book time into their calendars. Now, that would seem as far away as you could possibly get from being a special advisor in government. But the reality
does seem a little bit disconnected at the moment.
But the reality is that connecting those two ideas is putting your effort into something that can help people, that can leave the world a better place than when you found it. And I think that where I get most satisfaction is where I can see I'm having a tangible impact on
Right.
what I do. So the fact is that 500,000 people, have used YouCanBookMe. We have 1 million bookings, over 1 million bookings a month, of people who are scheduling through our platform, and those are small businesses, those are universities and schools, those are other SaaS companies, other SaaS tools, people like us. So there's a sort of a commercial element of people using YouCanBookMe who are selling services. There is a non-profit or an educational benefit of people who are using YouCanBookMe, and we give the tool away for free. So many of those people are using that tool as I said, essentially a free service. And we do that, and there's obviously going to be some people who are using it for businesses that I don't technically approve of, or that I'm not personally buying anything from that service. But overall, the collective benefit of what we're doing with our tool, I think, is to help people, help reduce business costs, increase productivity, save time, all these really good things. So in terms of generally, is society going to have a little slice of it improved a little bit by using tools like YouCanBookMe and the other tools, productivity tools out there? Is the sum total of business costs going to be reduced because they're using tools like ours? I think the answer is yes, and I think that's basically a good thing. So in a way, I went from sort of the meta narrative, if you like, of trying to work in politics at a high level down to very much a coalface kind of role, which is how do we produce something that improves people's lives? Now, not to sound too bitchy, but I would say there are plenty of internet tools out there that don't, self-evidently improve people's lives. I don't think Instagram, is something that basically improves people's lives. I think it is a tool that solves a problem that the internet invented. It's a lifestyle tool, it's a form of communication, and it's a form of entertainment, but it doesn't self-evidently and intrinsically make the world a better place. It's essentially a lifestyle tool. If you put it a different way, if tomorrow all our customers, we have around 17,000 customers, if none of our customers tomorrow could use YouCanBookMe, there would be a material and obvious reduction in their ability to do their business. Now, I suppose, having said that, though, there might be a handful of influencers out there that wouldn't be able to sell their Adidas brands, on their Instagram channels. But if we took Instagram away tomorrow, I doubt very much the world is going to sort of, end up really caring. And I think that that's where
we might have a lot of frustrated mobs on the street at this point, but
maybe.
But I agree with you.
But,
yeah.
I mean, I'm being probably unfair to Instagram, but my point is that the internet, I've always said about the internet that there's two types of problems the internet solves. Either it solves problems that were there before, and it solves it much better. So another good example is, for example, bus timetables, train timetables. Do you remember a time when it used to be really hard to know what time the buses were leaving, or you take pictures of the, you'd have to get the leaflet from the bus station.
We didn't actually take pictures at the time, actually. Yeah.
Couldn't take pictures. I just remembered exactly. So you'd have to get your actual bus timetable. The internet has 100% solved that problem. Timetabling is now no longer a problem worldwide. Yes. It is out there. Whereas the internet has also created problems that it then solves with a lot of these tools, and I don't think they're real problems. Now, I think that human problems that we have in the world are at the heart of our desire to make the world a better place, because what we define as a problem is when humans are unhappy, or when they are hurting each other, or when there's some kind of collective pain going on. So, as I said, I'm not saying that online scheduling is the sort of, is of the Bill Gates level of analysis in terms of making the world a better place for, solving malaria or whatever. It's not exactly tech for good, but it isn't tech for bad. It isn't certainly tech for harm.
Right.
YouCanBookMe, online scheduling generally, as the kind of tools that we build. These are tools that help businesses, help people, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy that what I'm doing, largely speaking, solves a problem in the world that did exist before, and we we can be proud of the product that we work on. And actually, to quote the famous political people, Basecamp, to the DHH and Jason Fried, they I think DHH H calls it honest work. He says he likes just doing an honest day's work. And that is, and myself and Peldy and others in our industry that are our friends and in our community recognize that you want to do something which is an honest day's work.
For sure.
And so that is why, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I run a company called YouCanBookMe, and we do online scheduling. We're a SaaS tool. We're bootstrapped, and we've been doing it for about 8-9 years. We're profitable. We're a remote company.
Okay.
We're about 16 people, distributed around Spain, the UK, and the US. And we try very hard to build values, the kind of values that I was working on when I worked in politics. And me and my co-founder Keith, who's our CTO, feel very strongly about. We put those values into the way we run our company.
Okay. Well, that was a fantastic intro, by the way. Let me bring this directly back to the topic of the conversation now.
Sure.
Like I mentioned before, we've met once before, but it's not like we know each other particularly well. Mm-hmm. And I did try to grab your attention in the subject line of my email by mentioning somebody we both know, Peldy, and so on. So that probably got you to open the email. But then it would have been very easy for you to basically say, you know what, I'm busy. Christmas is coming up. I don't feel like talking about this topic for whatever reason. So yeah. Why did you actually said in your email that, in your response to me, you said you agree that this isn't something we should be ignoring, least of all tech companies.
Right.
So what did you want to talk about when you said, yes, let's talk about this? Why do you think tech companies, least of all, should not be ignoring this problem of climate change?
Well, so I think that without sounding too, cliched, climate change obviously poses an existential threat to the planet, and also in a way, to the long-term survival of, the human species. I mean, we are ruining our planet. We can see that every day, and and I think that we are in a global problem of tragedy of the commons. So do you know that economic expression? Do you know what tragedy of the commons means?
I've certainly heard of it, but it would be good if you could explain it in a simple...
So in economic theory, economic theory is based all around the value of a resource and what you can do with that resource, and whether it has a price to it, and what the demand and the supply and demand of that resource is. And that forms the basis of all kind of attempts at economic influence and change and reform and so on.
Right.
And tragedy of the commons is a notion where you have a finite resource, and the commons example is, imagine in a village where you have one meadow in the middle of the village, and you have everybody with sheep that they want to graze on that meadow. Essentially, if you have one shepherd and one sheep, then that sheep can live very nicely off the grass from the meadow. But if you have two, then they have to share. And if you have three, then they have to share. And essentially, at some point, there's going to be a limited number of people who can graze on the meadow, or sheep that can graze on the meadow, before basically the meadow is not able to regenerate the grass to keep that population of sheep going. But every individual shepherd believes it is their right to have their sheep on there, because it's a common good, because the whole village owns the meadow and there is no ownership. And so obviously there's part of this argument is an argument for private ownership, because with private ownership you also then protect your resource, because you are putting your name on that finite resource and you can protect it from overgrazing, essentially. But in any kind of public good, you need to look at how much that resource is being used. And in a very real-time example of the tragedy of the commons is in New Delhi right now, where the public good is fresh air, is clean air. There's only a certain amount of clean air in Delhi, and it's been abused through the farmers all around, burning their crops, burning off their fields. It's been abused by everybody taking a vehicle into Delhi with a CC engine and polluting the air that way is being abused by any other kind of fire that's been lit. And as a result, the fresh air in Delhi that was a finite resource has been polluted for everybody, and now nobody can breathe fresh air.
Yes, at the time of recording, I suppose the last I read was that people in Delhi are being advised to stay indoors.
And they've issued 4 million face masks.
Yes.
And they're trying to get car drivers in Delhi to do alternate days of driving into the city to try to reduce the level of pollution. But this is toxic. I mean, this is essentially the whole of Delhi has become a gas chamber for air to breathe. And one of the problems is that the farmers all around the regions or outside of Delhi, who wouldn't necessarily be interested in driving into Delhi or doing anything in the city itself, will say they have a right to burn their crops because they are trying to make a living for their families wherever they are.
Yes.
So you just look at that one example, tragedy, and see, and if we had an argument, if we had any evidence that told us human beings were quite capable of ruining the public good so that everybody, fails, that is a good example. Human beings are quite capable of ruining the public good, and that's what I think global warming is doing.
Okay, so so am I understanding correctly? So tech companies should care because of the public good.
So
it's as simple as that. It's a moral imperative. It's like we live in this world. We depend. I mean, there's a survival imperative. Like we depend on people having devices and so on. And if we're not being, solving this problem, we're going to be out of business in a few years.
Right.
Is that what sort of you get?
So there's a capitalist argument there, obviously, and the basic capitalist argument is just as what you've said, which is if we ruin ourselves, we're no longer going to be in business.
Yes.
So you can see corporations now looking at long-term survival. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia and the way it's essentially trying to divest itself of its dependence on oil because it can see long-term that, it's all going south. And it needs to do something about it. So even from a purely capitalist argument, there is strong arguments for doing something about climate change. Because ultimately, if tech companies wanted to carry on growing and expanding, tech is still very much the commodity of the richer societies. And so if they want to sell into Asia and sell into Africa and sell into South America at the level of consumption that is happening across the rest of the developed countries, those we can't collapse under the failure of our own resources. You have to build up capacity in societies in order for them to become, and this is a capitalist argument. I'm not necessarily saying this is a good thing,
right?
But in terms of consumption, you need to build up a capacity for consumers to make fair, safe choices to buy things. So, for example, they need to have security of property in order to borrow against property. And if they're borrowing against their assets, they can buy stuff from you. So just simply the provision of safe and secure credit is a very important factor for commercial global companies to operate. You can't sell stuff to companies, to societies that can't borrow against insecure assets. Equally, just simply a consumer society where you want people to buy things which are essentially pretty pointless. You don't need to buy, I've got a Fitbit on my wrist that cost me £100. It's a very expensive device to do what? To tell me how many steps I've walked today. I mean, what an absurd thing to do. Most people in Southern Africa will say, I don't need a watch to tell me how many steps I've walked today because I know it takes me a 10-mile round trip to go and get water. So the
reason you need a Fitbit is because you're spending a lot of time at home.
Right.
Or in the office or wherever.
Exactly.
And you're staying at home because you work remotely.
This is a problem that my own consumer society caused. I wouldn't have this problem if I lived somewhere where I had to walk every day anyway. So there's all this kind of complicated social, economic and global development politics that tech companies are going to reach a ceiling in how much they can sell to people, how many people are going to buy a Fitbit. You need basically societies to get lazy before you can sell them Fitbits. And they can only get lazy when they get rich. And so there's this whole world of, development, and quite apart from a totally different topic, which is food, which of course right now I think in a slightly conspiracy theory kind of way, in many ways, we don't want the developing countries to develop, because if they do that, they'll start increasing their demand for resources such as meat that we don't want them to eat, because we know that if all of the population of Asia and Africa ate meat at the level that the Western societies ate meat at, then our CO2 emissions would go through the roof. Okay, so in fact, we're dependent on agrarian societies still existing.
So let me jump back onto the meat thing a little bit later, but from what you've said...
I haven't answered the second point, so that was the capitalist argument.
Okay, make your second point, and so that I don't kind of like... so
there's a moral argument. There, so let's say that's a capitalist argument.
Yes.
The other argument for why I think tech should be involved is because tech has this incredible capacity to innovate, to solve problems, to invent. So it is whatever our definitions of revolution is. It is perhaps the fourth wave of revolution. What are we talking about? Agrarian, industrial, information, and now digital. I don't know what historians would say, but let's say we're in the third or possibly fourth major revolution, if you don't want to combine information and digital. Now, as a result of that, we have got the first wave of what I think of as equivalent to railroad builders. Whoever decided to build the railroads around America and around Europe to basically connect people up in India, when people started building stuff to connect people that increases all the levels of innovation and trade and work together. Tech can do that. And so tech can do so many things. It can solve so many problems. It can innovate at such a exponential rate to make things smaller, faster, cheaper, better. The problems that we are solving in a very manual and in a very linear kind of way, tech can come in and solve those things in an exponential and automatic way. And so, for example, things like water salination, desalination, energy capture, the energy capture, energy storage, energy redistribution, creating low energy devices, things that don't need as much energy, using it's in a way what we need to get to. Are you a Back to the Future fan?
Yes, I am. I wouldn't say fan in the sense that it's been a long time since I've watched them, but but
the famous ending at Back to the Future is when the Doc comes back from the future and he says, where we go, we don't need gas, and he's basically putting rubbish into his car. And there's this kind of this sort of, it's funny, but at the same time it's mischievous, because it's saying, is there a future we could imagine where we take our own waste material and use it somehow for something to produce the fuel that we need?
Yes, which is actually something some energy companies are starting to try to do, with like capturing sort of gas for household use from sort of when it's a byproduct from, for example, farm byproducts rather, for example, or waste or things like that. Exactly.
And what you need is a kind of wholesale commitment to R&D, so that our cleverest, brightest, and most innovative people are looking at these kind of solutions. And they are, this is not like some kind of sci-fi movie. That's exactly what's happening. But in a way, it needs to be a pincer movement. So at the same time as the technologists are being thrown into, what feel like unsolvable problems, but they will come up with solutions.
Yeah.
We need the pressure on the companies that are still causing the vast majority of the problems, which is essentially a rampant consumer society that is spending
Yes,
an enormous amount on stuff that we don't need.
this is the
Those
core of the
two,
problem, right? Because so something you mentioned at the beginning about, for example, Instagram not being a problem, and then Instagram not solving a problem,
yeah,
or a genuine problem. I'm sure some people would argue
I'm
otherwise.
sure. I'm sure if people
Kind of
watch
with
this,
you
they're
on
going to
this.
get
And
enraged
the
and
same
send
with
me.
Fitbit, right?
Yeah.
You need Fitbit. You need societies, people to be lazy for Fitbit to become a solution to anything.
Right.
And there's a case to be made also that I mean, a lot of the environmental problems we're seeing is with especially CO2 emissions, and the are caused by tech in a lot of ways, right? So I'm not, by the way, I'm not the kind of person who advocates for like a romantic time pre-tech or pre-industrial or whatever,
Me neither.
but
I have a Fitbit.
right,
No,
we're doing
I
this.
spend my whole time on computers. I love the internet.
Exactly. So I'm not, but it is sort of, to me, undeniable that without the sort of like things which tech and science have created, we wouldn't have this problem. We might have other problems, like we'd be dying at 30, right? So,
Well, what I tell you what, again, the economists would call it negative externalities.
right.
So with every action, you have a negative externality. You have a cost to whatever you do.
Exactly. So there is, however, something from what you're saying and from something that I've been thinking about, which seems like a lot of people in tech don't really are sort of amoral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, why would that be? I find it sort of mystifying in a sense, because tech people who work in software, almost any sort of person I've met, tend to think that working in software is something which is advancing humankind in some way, right? There is this sort of notion of we're at the top of the food chain of innovation, and so on. Yet it doesn't seem like there is a genuine interest in many companies to have real kind of oversight across the sort of ethical spectrum, right? It's like,
but can I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but can you show me any industry where it's the case that all workers are signed up to the company's moral outlook?
I don't have an example, and it's not that I'm singling out tech or software as being worse or anything. It's just that that's the industry I know.
Mm.
So I can't really speak for.
So I mean, I would say unless you work for, so in Britain, we obviously have a very strong public sector. So there's many people who will work for the NHS or schools, or they'll work in the charity sector, the NGO
Yeah.
sector, and they're highly motivated. They're basically value-based workers. So they have, they're highly skilled, incredible workers, and I mean, particularly in the public health sector, in the NHS, immensely caring of people.
Yeah.
And they do it because they do believe that they want to do something good for the world. But the commercial sector is not advertising that as a fact. Like, essentially what the commercial sector would say is, if you really care about making the world a better place, go work for one of those charities or non-profit places or schools or public sector. Be a public, well, they call it a servant, be a public servant, serve your society. Whereas, and I think one of the issues is that once you get into the commercial sector, into the private sector, the messages that you're told all the time is, we are here to make money, we're here to make a profit. If we make a profit, we pay our shareholders, we pay our investors, we pay our customers will essentially benefit, and you're part of the commercial machine.
Right.
So there is intrinsic to the actual activity itself, it's not value based. And so the people that are solving problems, I agree with you. I do think people sort of think that if they're clever, that must mean that they're doing something good. But you're perfectly capable of being super clever and doing actually quite harmful things.
Okay, so then what is the role? So because what you just said, I'm sure you identify with some or a lot of that as being the CEO of a company, that you do need to make profit. Like I'm sure, that you've got employees depending on you. customers depending on you, and a whole sort of ecosystem around the company as well, which maybe other suppliers, contractors, and so on, which if you were not profitable, you're going to be negatively impacting
Exactly.
people, right?
We'd be a charity, and we're not a charity.
You're not so you're not a charity, right? And you need to be profitable. But so then what does your role become? Is it enough that the product you're producing is helping the productivity of people, and you can sort of say, all right, maybe we're helping the charity be more productive so they can be better?
Yeah,
right?
I think I do think that you end up with a very sort of reductive argument, which is quite difficult to justify in the end. In the end of the day, we're a private company, we make money.
Yes.
Where, in a way, the question has to lie, I think, is where are we accountable? To what extent are we accountable?
Okay.
And, and if we're accountable for what we do and what we say, then we can, in some ways, follow a path which is open to scrutiny. So part of it is about where is the accountability of society on companies that are doing harmful things. So I don't want this to be a party political broadcast for You Can Book Me. I can tell you all the good things we do. We do we obviously have personal interests which lead us to being philanthropic or whatever. So but this is not like me trying to make the case for how fantastic we are compared to somebody else.
No, that's understood.
But the question, so everybody has their own, and actually I think there's many companies that probably do really very good things in terms of their corporate responsibility, and they never shout about them because they just do them, and that's fantastic. So I would put it the other way, which is, well, how much harm are we doing? And I don't think we're doing any harm at all. I think we're doing basically good things, or at the very least we're doing neutral things. We are working hard for producing a good product that makes money, and we're not spending that money on polluting anything. We're not polluting anybody, we're not harming anything, whereas I don't think you can say that for tobacco manufacturers or arms sale people, or there's plenty of companies, or indeed even people that make highly addictive and unhealthy sugar products, highly processed food products that just don't do anybody any good and they harm people.
Like that, yes.
So I don't think you could look at my product and say it's harmful. And the second thing is, how do we operate as a company? Where do we invest to make our money?
So have you, for example, I discussed this internally around, for example, being aware of your carbon sort of like footprint.
Yeah. So
travel operations and so on.
Yeah. So every time we fly, every time we travel, we carbon offset. So we donate to various projects which are dedicated to offsetting any carbon usage. It's not good enough because in some ways you're still creating the problem and then you're offsetting it. It's not like a get out of jail card free, but we do.
But it's better than
offset.
doing nothing. When you say you carbon offset your travel, for example, is this the checkbox on like the KLM or Ryanair thing, or are you doing something? When you're booking a flight, sometimes you can donate like £1 for carbon offset.
No, we don't do that. I tell you what it is. It was recommended by. It's called like the golden. Oh, I can't find it without this being a sort of an unacceptable delay. But basically, don't worry. I'll send it to you afterwards. But there's a charity. There's a charity online that has like 60 projects, and it's called like the Gold Standard or something. And so we donate. I'm sure we probably donate more than technically speaking. We're not going around saying, okay, well, I flew, 2,000 miles and it's X amount per 2,000, so I'm going to, donate $2.99. Like, we actually do a significant donation to the projects. And in fact, I don't do it. It's one of my colleagues in You Can Book Me that will go online and find the projects that we want to donate to.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. It would be good to get that link, because there's a couple of different projects which I sort of what's the word, starting up in this area, sometimes it's hard to know who is really reliable, I suppose, as well, you know. I mean, because if you are spending the money on offsetting something, you want it to be the right
Goldstandard.org it's called.
gold standard. Okay.
Goldstandard.org, and you can, and they've got a whole load of projects around the world, and some of them could be things like, you know, trying to help reduce the number of fires in somewhere in Cambodia or something. You know, I mean, it can be lots of quite small projects. They're not, it's not just trying to do some kind of major attempt to reduce CO2 emissions by 1%. I mean, what it is trying to, it's a lot of small projects that together make up, or hopefully will make up some impact and help.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you one last sort of like question. Let me bring up one last sort of topic, which I kind of feel maybe normally a bit cheeky asking, but this is because of your background in politics. I kind of feel like you might have an interesting insight here. Where is the solution to this going to come from? Is it actually going to come from political action, or is it going to come from consumer action, or is it going to come from basically disaster hitting? Can we trust politicians to actually do what the
I think you have, like in India, I think you have to accept that there's a good chance we're going to basically completely screw this up, and we're all going to be living in a smog. It's very hard because I'm not a climate scientist, so you know, the warnings that come through about what they are saying could happen, I can't. How can I possibly judge it? I'm just another human being listening to that information. I think that if I was being really sensible, I would basically think about getting to higher ground. You know, like if I was not in my middle age, if I was young, if I was born now, you know, my children's age, I would not invest in the low-lying plains of Europe. You know, I would not buy a house in the Netherlands, for example.
Yeah.
I think that you have to assume in 100 years' time, these assets are going to be underwater. And I don't, you know, I think that we have to just accept at face value that that is what's going to happen. I suppose through that period of change, you will see quite rapid innovation that will maybe stop further climate change, but the damage has already been done. It's a bit like, you know, if you're smoking until you're 25 and you give up, the damage has already been done. And yes, you might prevent further risk, but for a good 10, 15 years afterwards, you're just at risk, you know, you're still at risk. And we will probably just realize too late, but very rapidly change our behavior when we start to see, you know, sort of Kent go underwater in Britain. I think that what I notice, and this is just in my hometown in Bedford, we have a zero waste shop that's opened, and it's currently doing quite well. And I think it's still probably a bit of a luxury, quite a middle class thing to do, to go along, you know, with your Tupperware and get your muesli, you know, reset. Muesli is quite an expensive breakfast cereal, and so for the least able to afford it, people are still shopping in Lidl and Iceland and Aldi, and they're getting, you know, the cheapest food they can for their family. And I don't think anybody could criticize them that they are personally causing climate change, because they're not going to the expensive zero waste shop, you know, to get muesli. And I think there's still a class, an intersection of class and wealth here, about only rich people are causing climate change, and also only rich people can basically afford the alternatives. No normal person can afford a Tesla. You know, most people who are living in flats aren't going to be able to afford electric cars. Indeed, they probably can't even afford cars, and they're traveling by public transport. So, you know, there was something that happened recently in London. The climate emergency people, the Extinction Rebellion.
I was going to ask you what you thought about their activities recently.
Well, in many ways, I think direct action is a good option, and it's famous for being effective in terms of political change. You know, women chaining themselves to railings to get the vote for women. You know, there's plenty, Gandhi, you know, there's plenty of examples of direct action being disruptive enough to the people in power to make them change what they do.
Yeah.
I think that the Extinction Rebellion people clambering around at 6 a.m. on tube, you know, at tube stops, stopping working people from getting to work was outrageous and insulting, as if somehow people getting to work on the London Underground are doing something, you know, direct to cause climate change. And I think
that's been a concern I've had about that particular stunt, because it's not really stopping, you know, financial people, city people, sort of like getting to their high-paying jobs in Canary Wharf or the city. Really, it's probably stopping the poorer people of London getting to
work, and they might be on 0-hour contract. They might be one of those people might have lost their job that day because they were late getting in. And so it's, you've got to be balanced, because it's such a huge topic. And so, to answer your question, I think we are damaged. I think we have harmed ourselves. I think that some of that harm is going to come to pass. We can already see the evidence of it. I do think, though, that very rapidly the commercial, the capitalist machine is going to kick in. And so just like, have you noticed that nowadays, you know, how quickly we switched from film-based cameras to digital cameras, how quickly everybody got flat screen TVs.
It is possible, isn't it? It is really remarkably possible. I mean, when you think about the first iPhone was launched in 2007,
10 years ago. It was
right?
10 years. And now you can't imagine it. And so I think, for example, electric cars.
Years, right? Yeah, exactly.
Electric cars is something that it won't just be the cause of the fancy rich. Actually, even if the government says that petrol cars need to be phased out by 2025 or 2030, whatever it is actually going to be, no, it's not 2025, it's going to be 2040. So in the UK, they've said 2040. It's just too far away. And I would predict by 2030, nobody's going to have a petrol car. It's just going to be the most craziest thing, and everybody's going to switch to electrics, and the infrastructure will go in, and that's what you have to do. That's what the government needs to start doing, is saying, right, we need to think about long-term infrastructure for electric charging points. We need to invest in long-term capacity in the energy industry to supply the electricity that we need. We need to invest in communal transport options so that we're not having to rely on a single car for everybody, and we can actually look at much more public and yet privileged public transport options for people, like shared driving options and that kind of thing. So that is going to happen, I would imagine, very quickly. I think very quickly, supermarkets will start offering refillable options. Packaging is going to come down. There's going to be a whole load of, even now, look at the industry for plant-based food. So they're not calling it vegetarian because vegetarian sounds ideological. Vegetarian sounds moral. Whereas plant-based food sounds like, oh yes, I care about the planet, I'm going to eat less meat, which means farmers are going to start looking at their cattle stock and thinking, right, we need to diversify because people aren't buying as much beef as they used to. And that's going to happen very quickly. So I think in a decade, we will have a transformed consumer society, but I don't think that's going to be enough to seriously change some of the impact that's already happened. So all it will do is slow down, because the problem is, it doesn't really matter how often I go to a zero waste shop. What matters is how quickly is China building airports? How quickly is India, starting to eat meat? How quickly are actually the developing countries adopting high carbon use resources? So as quickly as we divest, we're going to equalize. And that is a massive political question, because it's not about saying to Indians, don't eat as much meat, or Chinese business people, stop flying. It's about saying to a Western businessman in America, don't eat beef every day. It's about telling rich people in Western developed countries, you need to stop doing the things that you like doing. And to equalize the whole of the world in terms of the resources. So, for example, the thing that we really need is not just carbon offsetting, because I was a rich person in the first place to be able to fly all over the place. So my carbon offset is kind of, I caused the pollution in the first place. What you actually need is a sophisticated form of global carbon exchange. And then we, Western people, need to sell their carbon to, the developing countries. And we need to basically, just like a pure economic argument would say, the actual resource we're now talking about is carbon. And having a proper international global carbon exchange economy.
You're talking about carbon being currency, basically, right? So being a global currency, replacing the dollar, for example, or the euro.
Right. And I mean, and look at what technologists actually produced is Bitcoin, which is one of the worst resource intensive technologies they could ever have invented.
Yes, which is one of the, I haven't brought up Bitcoin with any of my guests so far, because I fear to become a bit of a hate fest, because I just have such huge problems with that whole approach to innovation. One more thing, Extinction Rebellion and the climate strikes. Have any of your, if people, are people in your company participating? Is it okay for them to do that? Do you want to be apolitical about that, or what's a personal view as a CEO of a tech company?
Well, I mean, I would have to sort of, if it was sort of attacking something that they thought we were doing that was harmful, I would probably expect them to talk to me about it before they striked. If people in my company want to make their views known about climate change, I'd happily support them. And I go on, climate change marches. I do things to contribute personally to, activities which are about reducing climate change. My family's gone vegetarian and we don't own a car. So, we're trying to do our personal best for these things. And I'd encourage anybody in our company to do the same. But as I said, I think it's very hard to it's, in a way, it's the softer version of tragedy of the commons. No one individual person is causing this problem. This is a global problem where we don't just have two people that are eating meat and driving around in a car, because there might be really good reasons for using that resource that way. Mm-hmm. What we actually have is global rich, global poor. We have, we have one great big meadow in our global village, and we are all trying to graze our sheep on that meadow, and that is our big problem. And for that you need international respected rules, you need global policies, you do need the climate change accord that unfortunately the US has pulled out of. You do need global agreements. This is a global threat. This is like the equivalent of the entire world is under attack from aliens. We need a global response. And then the kind of opportunity for individual free riding, which is, I get to drive my car because I live in a rich country, whereas you don't get to have a car now ever because you lived in a poor country and you're basically late to the party. We don't get to make that kind of global free riding anymore, and everybody has to contribute. So it is a huge mountain to climb politically, and I think it's been fantastic to have people like Greta Thunberg to make that kind of voice heard at that level, and she's been doing amazingly, I think. And this is just a final point in terms of our technologists, if I'm allowed a rant slightly.
Go for it. I can always edit stuff, but go for it.
So building technology companies in the last 15-20 years, I think historians will go back and say that was the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. The kind of the amazing industrialists of the 19th century that made an absolute fortune. Roundtree and Carnegie and all these huge the banking, industrial and investment that created mega billionaires in
these big names that we hardly remember are actually people anymore.
In tech, that bounty, the bounty that those guys had, we have seen the tech bounty that was given to people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Zuckerberg. You know, these people who came in that kind of early mover network effect business model. You know, I mean, I might be wrong, but I don't think anybody on earth is going to produce a company like Amazon again for some time, you know, until we have some amazingly new science, which is going to create a different commodity. Amazon has done it. It's created this incredible commercial bounty. So has Facebook, so has Apple, and so has Google, and so has those kind of huge companies
Microsoft,
like PayPal,
right?
and Microsoft.
IBM and so on.
Exactly. Now, so we have these titans of tech philanthropists, and it annoys me, frankly, that you know, I'm sure you could argue this as a Luddite argument, that they are putting all of their money and effort into building rockets into space on some notional argument that basically we might need to get to Mars one day, which sounds a bit crazy. I also get the idea that if you invest in space technology, you then have some kind of transferable, you know, transferable knowledge to put on something.
Well, but to be blunt about it, that's a bullshit argument, because there's no evidence that if you invest in space technology, you get space technology. If you invest in carbon capture technology, you get carbon capture technology. You don't need the side effect. You can go
so exactly. So essentially, basically, I don't know how offensive and insulting I'm allowed to be, if I'm allowed to swear, but basically the kind of the massive dicks into space contest is completely irrelevant to the argument about what tech could do. I think the only person doing anything really, I mean, obviously Elon Musk is a particularly kind of eccentric version of that, but Bill Gates is doing some incredible work on the ground for clean toilets and anti-malarial. I mean, he has just gone in and he's thought about what are the actual problems that millions of people suffer from and trying to fix that. And I respect that an enormous amount, because he's got a foundation that has access to as much money as Jeff Bezos has. And yet Jeff Bezos has taken his basic business model of making money in Amazon because you can, and then he's put that bounty into this utterly, you know, I think irrelevant vanity project, which is costing billions of pounds. And I think that more morally, it is acceptable to say to Jeff Bezos, you have billions and billions of pounds. You now need to put that bounty back into society to solve this crisis. Whereas you can't say to a poor single mother of 5, you can't buy your cheap XYZ from a cheap supermarket because of climate change, or you can't put a cheap nappy on your baby because of climate change. I think asking poor women to change their access to cheap commodities is problematic, but I think you can ask Jeff Bezos to stop spending his money on sending rockets into space and start doing something of value to the human being.
Oh, for sure. And that's a nice circle back to I heard Bill Gates speak recently, a few weeks ago now, on is it one of the late night American shows, the one with Stephen Colbert, where he was advocating for basically he was saying, I'm not taxed enough as a rich person because rich people can't be trusted to do the right thing, essentially, something like that.
And he's right. And look at them, that's exactly what they do. The billionaires of the world, given the fact that whatever this outrageous statement is, that 27 billionaires in the world own half of the world's wealth. So you could argue in some ways, so half of the world's problems, is their responsibility. So if you have half the wealth, you have half the problems. That's what we would do in old-fashioned, progressive taxation.
We've enabled them to become. So Jeff Bezos has not become a billionaire, a mega billionaire, just by his own. We have, as the richer part of the world as well, enabled him to become that, right?
Yeah, I don't resent his
Prime. We buy into AWS.
Yeah, but I don't resent that, though. I think that, he has produced some fantastic products. Amazon is an amazing company. Some of his products are absolutely incredible. And he is doing, he's a fantastic businessman. I'm not criticizing his businesses at all. I think Amazon is fantastic. What it's done, though, has created a bounty. So it's basically like a gold rush. And he was the first mover on a business model that he executed absolutely incredibly, and he has made billions. So what I'm criticizing is how he chooses to spend those billions now.
Okay. So there's, again, a moral imperative, and we're sort of, well, let's just say that it's not clear what the right thing to do is at the moment in tech and in software. So, well, that was a fascinating conversation, by the way. It's the first time recently that I've spoken to somebody who is so well sort of like into the political side of things. So it's a new perspective for me. Hello, me again. That was Bridget Harris talking to me about her experiences in politics and what her personal views are on our climate emergency, and more importantly, what we all should be doing to help address this problem. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. In the meantime, please feel free to visit our page, fatalair.blog/contribute, if you'd like to support the show. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.